principal at Sussex Christian School. A number of our students know her. And that's right, let's hear it for Sussex. And she's also the executive director of Christian Action Federation of New Brunswick. And she's going to share a bit about that ministry and what it looks like. And just want to say thanks again for coming back. Some of you may know Pastor Trent Boyd, our church history teacher. This is his sister, in case you're wondering any connections. So don't judge her ministry in the same way we've all come to judge his. Let's cut her some slack. All right. Let's pray. Father in heaven, we do love you, and we're thankful for the influence that this ministry has received from the Boyd family over the years, and for the many that have come from that part of New Brunswick to study here, the many who have encouraged others to come and study here. Lord, there's just been a great sense of family over the years, and we're grateful for that. And for Marcia, Lord, as she shares this morning, I just pray that you would give to her that sense of freedom to say the things that are on her heart. Help us to be good listeners, we ask in Christ's name. Amen. Okay, let's stand.
Go tell it on the mountain, over the hills and a manger. The humble Christ was born and brought us God's salvation that blessed Christmas morn. Go tell it on the mountain, over the hills and everywhere. Go tell it on the mountain that Jesus Christ is born. While shepherds kept their watching o'er silent flocks by night, behold, throughout the heavens there shone a holy light. Go tell it on the mountain, over the hills and everywhere. Go tell it on the mountain that Jesus Christ is born. The shepherds feared and trembled when low above the earth rang out the angel chorus that hailed our Savior's birth. Go tell it on the mountain, over the hills and everywhere. Go tell it on the mountain that Jesus Christ is born.
It's a privilege to be here with you today. We've got, I'm principal, as your dean said, down in Sussex, and we have one of our Sussex Christian School grads here. Jacob, where is he? Want to be sure to embarrass him, it's good. And one of our hometown boys from Hatfield Point, Isaac Nice, down here. So we're just thrilled to see both of these guys today, as well as I'm thrilled to be here with all of you. My niece Lydia is here with us today. There's Lydia. Lydia's doing her 4th year with us down at Sussex Christian School. And if I can just put in a little plug for that, we'd love to have a 4th year student with us next year as well. Lydia will be a hard act to follow, but we'd love to have somebody consider and think about that. There are a lot of neat things that are happening in education and in Christian education, and in our school we have a program for special needs students that you could partner with. We have a program with international students that you could partner with. You could partner with our sports program, our elementary program, all kinds of different things that you could do depending on what your gifting was. Well, with the Christian Action Federation of New Brunswick, I travel and speak to youth in the province of pertinent issues and things that are happening in the province with our youth. And so one of the issues that the Action Federation has always been involved in is this idea of substance and addiction issues. And really we are a preventative education organization, and so we're really wanting to get out and talk to youth about making good choices and wise choices. And we're finding that we're needing to have those conversations younger and younger. I was to a Bible camp 3 or 4 years ago, and it was a middle school camp. And we had probably 75 kids. And I asked them, how many kids in, their grade 6 to grade 8, how many students in that group had already been offered some kind of substance? And certainly about 3/4 of those kids raised their hands. And so helping them think through these issues. So today, what I brought with me is just our latest presentation on substance and thinking through this issue in our province. It's not that I think necessarily that any of you have substance issues, but the youth that you minister to and go out and work with, and as you find what it is that the Lord is calling you to do, just thinking about this particular area, which is certainly all around us. And even within New Brunswick, we find, the statistics are a little sobering. How many kids are involved with underage drinking? How many kids are involved with cannabis use, even at the high school level? Romans 12:2, of course, tells us not to be conformed to the world and the way the world does things, but to be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And that when we think about this idea of substance, the world gives us a message, and we really want to be out there with a sort of a countercultural message about substance. This idea of our culture, the presentation's called Higher, and I thought about our kids even in our New Brunswick culture, our kids who are perhaps not involved with a Christian background or not have the opportunity to be raised up through a Christian home and family and church and youth group. There's this emptiness and a sense of wanting to fill a void. And this idea of getting high is part of filling that void. I heard one time this phrase that drug abuse is a disease of our feelings. And I think oftentimes at entry level, when young people are making decisions about substance, it is about feelings, how they feel about fitting in, how they feel about themselves, how they feel about the circumstances around them. And I always tell kids when I'm out speaking to them, if you have some kind of issue, some kind of problem, and you use substance to medicate that problem, you had one problem, now you have two. And so compounding the problem with substance. I talk to kids about the addiction cycle, about experimentation and casual use, increased use, and then addiction, and always ask this question, what is the most dangerous part of this cycle? And, I always get, depending on the age group, I usually get, if it's middle school kids, I'll get about half and half. Some kids will get it right off, that experimentation is actually the most dangerous part of the cycle, and that if they don't begin to use, they don't have to worry about addiction. And so, we talk about that and dialogue about that. Nobody wakes up in the morning and says, what I'd really like to do with my life? I'd like to be an alcoholic. Nobody sets out for those kinds of things. But with experimentation and increased use, unfortunately, that can happen. And then the cycles will loop. And people who have come out of addiction, have struggled with addiction and come out of addiction, for others, they seem to have great victory over it through the Lord. Others, even in circles, can still battle that on a regular basis, and so it's certainly a real issue. So in New Brunswick, about every so many years, we're due for another one this year. The last one was 2012. There's an initiative to actually study drug and substance abuse within our provincial schools, our public schools. And it's anonymous. And of course, if you put your name to it, it's hard to get good research when somebody's putting their name to their usage. But it's really interesting, actually. It's an interesting study. Now, I know you're not all from New Brunswick, but the thing that I like about this study is that it's really from here. And so you can look at the map of New Brunswick and look at substance issues and look at the issues that we're having. So not looking like to the US or looking out west or somewhere else. It actually tells us right here what our issues are. Because sometimes, as I'm driving up here today, so beautiful, so lovely, so, we're the picture province. We can think, everything is just, so squeaky clean and lovely. And yet this substance issue is certainly a very, very real thing in our province. So one young man, at the end of the study, they had an opportunity for comments. He said, "I feel the use of cannabis once in a while isn't bad. If you have a lot of problems, it helps. You guys don't know why people do drugs. You just ask if they do them." Now, I didn't agree with his answer, but I did think that was really profound that he said that. That he said, the whole study was about the what kids are using. That's all it measured. But it was so interesting to me that this kid in 9th grade, anonymously in the study, actually says, "You don't ask why. You don't ask why." And ever since I have read that study a number of years ago, I've thought, that young man is a real person. I thought it's profound because that is the question. It's why. Because this generation of New Brunswickers is actually, wherever you're from, Nova Scotia or PEI or down through Maine, wherever it is you maybe come from, this would no doubt be true, that we're the most sophisticated group of young people that know the most about the dangers of substance. When the Christian Action Federation was first traveling the province back in the 1960s and 70s, our health curriculums in schools didn't talk about the dangers of addiction and substance. We talk about that now in our schools. We talk about it. Kids know more than they've ever known. In fact, sometimes I'll test that out and I'll go into a group of kids and I'll say, what are the dangers of this? And they can fill a whiteboard with the stuff they know about it. So the question has got to be then, why? Because, I'm a big proponent of education. I've been in education for my whole career, but at the same time, I know it's not, it's not an idol at the feet that we worship in the sense that it's the answer to everything. And sometimes we think, well, if we give them enough education, they'll figure it out and they'll do what they need to do. But it goes much deeper than that. Teens and adolescents, of course, are especially vulnerable to choices. And often if you look at somebody who is, an adult in their 40s, 50s, 60s, and they have some kind of an addiction issue they've been plagued with for many years, if you roll back the history book, you'll find the decisions to get involved with substance was part of their teenage years. And so the Christian Action Federation is out talking to kids in those years about choices that they're making. There's a real casual attitude in our culture about drinking, and social media, you see these different memes that come across, and people are so casual about some of these very, very serious things. I spoke actually in this area, the Woodstock area, one time a few years ago, and a lady that was in my presentation came up and talked to me afterwards. She was actually an addictions counselor. And she said, the kids always ask me, what is the most dangerous drug? And I stopped and I thought, gee, I want to know the answer to that. What is the most dangerous drug? And she said, well, it's alcohol. I always tell them it's alcohol. I said, really? She said, yeah, that's how they react too. But she said, society doesn't treat it as a drug. I don't treat it as a drug. And there's a casualness about it in the advertising, like I said, social media, those kinds of things. We've seen recently we're always concerned about entry level for kids and things that will appeal to kids. And when I was a kid, we used to have something called Pop Shop Pop, where you'd have a case of bottles of pop, and you drank it, and then you put the bottles back in, and went back and exchanged it for another case. And Pop Shop has circulated back around again as pop, as soda, but it's like a throwback. So for people who remember that, it's like, oh yeah, Pop Shop Pop. Pop Shop Pop has, in the last couple of years, has been marketing a new product that is more than just soda and pop. It actually has alcohol in it. And so with flavors like lime and cream soda and the kinds of sugary drinks that really appeal to kids as you get older, that sugary taste kind of appeals to you less and less, really is the palate of a young person. And one of the Toronto papers did a journalist took this and really did an extensive review of the idea of how concerning this is, that these entry-level type things for our kids. And so we ask the question, why? You know, I did a little field trip online. Sometimes I do that, you look up some things online, and looked up stars or musical artists that had died of drug overdose, whether intentional or unintentional. And there are actually whole Wikipedia pages that are dedicated to the deaths of artists, and they'll start at a certain year and just list them. And you think, we understand from a Christian perspective, we understand the void that is there. And I think it's these are really sober examples of how doesn't matter how much money, doesn't matter how much fame, doesn't matter how much power, there's still a void. And, a couple of artists in the last few years that have succumbed to that. Prince was one. The autopsy said that he died of an accidental overdose of fentanyl. There's been lots of discussion about that since. Whitney Houston was an artist that would have been popular when I was young. Her music, for the most part, was very, it was that pop kind of, just kind of pop sound, not too much depth to it. And, it's interesting as I have read some things about her life, that in those years when I was a teenager growing up and her music was popular, and she just, they always marketed her, she'd come out of the church and, she sang in the choir and all those things, that really from the very beginning of her career, she had been involved in offer drugs, and that was a part of her whole career, to which, of course, she died of an overdose, I forget, 3 or 4 years ago now, maybe 5, 6 years ago. So we think about that void. One of the things that we have been focusing on with Christian Action Federation, it's been a year since this past October, it was a year that our country legalized recreational cannabis. And that was a really controversial move by our province. Not our province, sorry, our country. We'll blame Trudeau for that, but we won't get political today. And, it's interesting as I talk, it's kind of changed the format of our presentations this last year, because now we're talking to kids about something that the government has said, this is legal. And, of course, there's lots of argument back and forth, lots of arguments on both sides. But the concern was, of course, that when kids in our society hear legal, they hear, well, it must be okay, or it must not be that harmless. And one of the pro things of legalizing marijuana was that we could clean the situation up. We could start to charge tax, and from those tax dollars, we can actually now educate our youth to tell them how dangerous this substance is. When I unpack that with the kids are like, well, that's weird. I think, well, you said it, I didn't, but they always kind of figure that piece out. No matter where I speak and talk to kids about this, usually someone will come up after and say, but marijuana is 100% natural. I heard a gentleman, a Christian psychiatrist, actually speak on this topic, and he said, snake venom is 100% natural, but it isn't something you necessarily want to get involved with. Now, this is a picture from inside of a cannabis store in New Brunswick. I did not go in and take the picture, but I pulled it off the internet. But I think when I talk to the kids about, the government has legalized, part of it is, educating youth, and yet it's a business in our province that's trying to get customers. And so you can see from, I hope you can see from that picture, this idea of discover, connect, relax, kind of this attitude of, this is all very good, this is appealing. It's drawing in consumers. And so it's really difficult to be in the business of selling and also to be in the business of saying, sorry kids, this is really dangerous for you long term. And so it puts our kids, I believe, at risk and compromises their future choices based on our government's choice to say, this is legal. There's all kinds of, I won't get into all the long-term issues and effects of recreational cannabis, but there are a lot of things. And one of the things that we're most concerned about is mental health issues. And mental health can exist certainly outside of any kind of cannabis use, but that it puts people more at risk in the mental health world. And in fact, this gentleman that we had recently had speak for the Christian Action Federation, this Christian psychiatrist, he said they're bracing for a mental health crisis, and that it's really difficult, to get kids to own up to what they're using, what they're on, and if they're being taken to a psychiatrist, it's pretty important that they're upfront about those things. And so it's something that, again, as we travel and talk with youth in the province, it's helping them to understand and to make good choices. We can have all the education, we can have all the intelligent quotient, we can have all the IQ. IQ is so much what we measure in school. How much you know about this or about that. I often wish as an educator we measured more of the EQ, the emotional quotient of a young person, because those are the things that really sustain us. But it's that emotional quotient of the brain. When I said drug abuse is a disease of our feelings, it's that EQ, it's that emotional quotient. It's how well we're able to, how well a young person in a situation of peer pressure is able to say yes or no. And the ministry of the students from this school, I know as you go out to different youth groups and you work at camps in the summer and you're headed on mission trips and all kinds of things, just that one person who takes an interest in a young person can make all the difference in helping them to make wise choices. I've seen icebergs a couple of times. First time I was going to see an iceberg, I remember thinking, well, that can't be any big deal until you see it. You're like, oh my God, it's so big. It's a huge, huge iceberg. But the cool thing about icebergs is knowing that the majority of it's actually below the water. And so when you see it and it's so large, you just can't quite fathom, what's happening underneath. And IQ is often like that, where it's how we present, it's what we know, it's our knowledge. But our EQ, how well we're able to interact in situations. Dependency is an issue, as we know. If it's so horrible, why do people get involved? Why do people use? And all kinds of reasons. But like I said, when we know the Lord, we understand that to the unbeliever, sometimes life can seem hopeless. It can seem like, kids sometimes are in family situations where they don't have any control over what's happening and who they live with and how things are coming together or not coming together in their families. Peer pressure is a big one. Substance being present. For kids who have substance in the home, there's a curiosity with that they're more likely to be involved with substance. We talked about the Pop Shop, creating that hard copy of Pop Shop, including alcohol in it. E-cigarettes, when I first started speaking for Christian Action Federation, we used to talk a lot to kids about tobacco cigarettes. Well, tobacco cigarettes are kind of out for kids, but e-cigarettes are kind of in. And statistics would say they're really in for kids and for students. And again, some of the liquid that they're putting in those vaping pipes have those flavors that are really designed to draw kids in. And it just reminds us that I'll talk about this in a second, but the enemy of our souls just there is, he knows at what level, at what thing. For the kids it's this, and different ages it's something else. It's kind of like, I know you kids don't have Facebook because it's for old people now, but around Facebook, if you don't do that ad blocker thing, it gives you the ads that are critique to you. So I'm getting them now for products for middle-aged women. I'm getting on the sides. And really upset about the Weight Watcher ones coming on. But it's like they critique, to you, to advertise to you as an individual. So what's appearing on my feed is different than what's appearing on your feed based on demographic and age. And I feel like, I really believe that is how the enemy of our souls, he knows the things and the weak spots of us at different ages and stages. And things like those e-cigarettes and things like that Pop Shop hard alcohol, those sugary things that they're putting in there are an attraction to a certain demographic, a young demographic. Significant brain growth and development occurs during adolescence. I just really passionately hate to see a young person's life consumed with substance and making poor choices with substance at 13 and 14 and 15. Because I think about, I'm an educator, so I love the brain, and I love brain research, and I love to know this amazing organ that God put inside of our head and all that it can do, and to think about abusing that with substance that could have long-term effects. I think the enemy is so cunning that he lays those traps for the feet of our kids. Fentanyl, I wanted to shift for a second as we think about life and ministry, and some of you may be thinking of local church ministry, and others may be thinking of going overseas. And in Canada, Health Canada has said we have a fentanyl crisis in Canada. We have a fentanyl crisis in Canada. This poster was done in Manitoba. Manitoba put out this campaign to kind of really jar people into understanding how difficult this crisis was. And so if we look at more than 12,800 deaths, more than 12,800 deaths have occurred since January 2016 in this country, in this fentanyl opioid crisis. People who've died senselessly, looking and searching for meaning. Fentanyl is extremely potent, it's extremely dangerous, and for people that get involved even in experimenting, goes back to that addiction cycle. Fentanyl is so potent that someone's first time trying fentanyl can actually be lethal and actually kill them. And 12,800 people, 800 Canadians have died on fentanyl. And you can see in the statistic here that Canada is right up there in the developing world as far as this particular crisis. The title of this presentation is Higher. What is it that we continue to look for and are not finding? And we, of course, know what that is. When there's all kinds of conversations about drugs and street drugs and prescription drugs. If you get a prescription at the doctor and you go to the drugstore to get it, you're almost afraid to take it after you read all the warning pages. It's like page after page after page, and you think, I don't know if I should take this or not. They put all the warnings in. And yet, you call your doctor and he's like, oh, no, it's fine. They just have to do that because, 1 in a million person had some kind of issue. So that's the legal thing. But, drug dealers on the street, and even, I have to say, our own government in relation to recreational cannabis, we're not giving the warnings. We're not giving the warnings. And of course, the scriptures say the love of money is the root of all evil. And as you mind back to many of these social issues in our culture, it minds back to money. Bad company ruins good morals, 1 Corinthians says. And so peers and those peer groups, Youth groups and kids being involved in extended ministry from churches and youth groups and entry level into the church from those events are just so important. So important for them to make connections. That they would learn to live self-controlled and upright and godly lives in this present age, and we know that is certainly possible. But we do know that there is an enemy that walks around, as the scriptures say, as a roaring lion, and that's not a quiet picture, is it? It's this sense that, as Proverbs would say, a trap is laid for our feet. And so as we work and minister with young people, we want to be sure that we're talking to them about the source of good choices. There is all kinds of, this is from a website called DAFACTS, DAFACTS, just some interesting information about substance abuse and some questionnaires about if you thought somebody was into some kind of trouble with substance and answering questions. And as we think about what we can do, I think of the picture of Jesus as the scriptures talk about the Good Shepherd going out for the one. And sometimes, as adults and people who've been involved with substance, if abused substance for a number of years, they aren't typically a real lovely person or a person that we necessarily gravitate towards or take to. And I think, there's a picture in Scripture that is just such an important arena for us to be in. And I think that God can have us in those arenas. I really believe, different times when I speak to kids, they'll say, well, what about you? What drugs did you use? Well, I actually never used drugs. and I think that's a good choice. Sometimes even in the church, we kind of get, we love a redemptive story and a victorious story of God bringing a person out of a life of sin and brings all of us out of sin, but bringing us out of a life of addiction or substance, and we think, wow, it's a great testimony. And those of us that have grown up in the church, we think, well, I don't have a very exciting testimony. I never did drugs, right? And I really just think that the Lord doesn't want us to feel that way. I think that for those of us who were able to come up through some backgrounds where we got some foundation and grounding, we've been given a lot, and it's time for us to, to go out and to serve and to take Christ into the community. And to be that light in the darkness that the scriptures talk about. And places where people are gathered who have addiction issues, where addiction happens, it is dark. And we need the Lord's light in those places. There's a few things now that are happening in our community more than ever. Things that are happening in the community for people who are struggling with addiction. I do think we're talking about it more, and I think that that's a good thing, and I think it's a good place for the church to be and for us to be ministering in places where addiction is prevalent and where people are looking for help. I love this verse from the Psalms, and I'll close with this. From the end of the earth I will cry to you when my heart is overwhelmed. Lead me to the rock that is higher than I am. And that's the void. That's the void in our culture. And so faithfulness to the Lord and His Word and ministering to the community around us, this message, that it's the rock that's higher than I am, that brings meaning and redemption to my soul, to your soul, and what we have to offer the community. So that's what we're doing with Christian Action these days. That's kind of the up-to-date, the latest thing that we're focusing on, and really wanting to start those conversations with kids about the legalization of marijuana as that becomes their new reality, and helping them sort through that and helping them make wise choices. When we talk to groups within churches and youth groups and those kinds of settings, Bible camps, we're able to use the scriptures as I've used today. When we're out in public schools, we aren't allowed to do it exactly that way, but we have good conversations with kids afterwards, and excited about that. So I appreciate being able to be here today, and Mr. McMahon, I'll turn it back over to you.
If you want to have a conversation with Dr. Mitchell, if there's
there's some resources that she may be able to provide for you through Christian Action Federation as you're thinking about your own ministries with youth groups. Right now, there may be something that she can be a help with, so I'm going to dismiss you now, say thank you. You always come so well prepared to tell us what we need to hear about our culture, so thank you for this. You guys are free to go.